Okay, let's go ahead and jump into our first story. Our first story is going to be a short one. It's actually a recommendation from a YouTube viewer named Klubitz. So, Klubitz posted on YouTube in reference to a video. Honestly, I forgot what the video itself was that they were referencing. I think it was the one where people were thinking I'm struggling to remember. It was something to do with people thinking they were something... Oh, Truman Show. It was the Truman Show one. People who thought they were stuck in the Truman Show. Klubitz said, speaking of delusions, have you ever heard of the Glass Delusion? People think they're made of glass. Now, obviously, I had to go do research on that. Glass Delusion was super bizarre. So, between the 15th and the 17th century, it was a delusion that popped up. It was a product of its time. And that's one thing I talked about on the Truman Show Delusion episode, is that these type of invasive thoughts are based on the time period that they're in. So nowadays, people may think they're stuck in the Matrix or stuck in a reality show, but back in the 60s, it was the Russians are putting radio waves into my head. Well, you go back in the 15th century, they didn't have reality shows, which was bleak. Everybody loves reality. I don't care what you guys say. I don't care. Everybody watches reality shows. And you go, I don't watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I'm not talking Pawn Stars, Mythbusters. Come on, those are reality. Those are reality shows at their core, because half of it is the learning part of it, but the other half are the personalities involved. It's a reality show. Those are reality shows. They're not scripted sitcoms or dramas or anything like that. Everyone watches reality shows. So it was a bleak... That's why they called it the Dark Ages, because there was no reality shows. The real world had not been invented yet. It's dark times for the Republic. Anyways, 15th to 17th century, their new technology, their new thing for people to get excited about and a little scared was glass, was see-through glass. Now, glass had been around for centuries before that, but window panes hadn't. Actually, they had a kind of window-type pane. It was not glass. It was this other kind of see-through-ish stuff that I don't remember because I didn't put it in my notes. But having see-through windows in your house or in your castle or wherever was brand new. And that's why this was affecting primarily rich people. The royals were the ones suffering from glass delusion. Most famous sufferer was King Charles VI of France. He believed that parts of him were made of glass, and so he wouldn't let anybody touch him. And he wore reinforced clothing. So, of course, my imagination took it to him walking around in a suit of armor. But when I looked into it, he just wore a cushion on his butt. It's this idea that they're so fragile that any unexpected movement, jumping down on a bed too hard, what have you, will cause them to break. When psychologists look back, they think the glass delusion was an offshoot of just general melancholy. Which, it was just this blasé. It was this weird reaction to... I guess I always thought melancholy was just kind of you basically... you're just you're the living embodiment of a Smashing Pumpkins song. And they might have more of a medical disease. There might actually be a specific term that melancholy means. But... maybe they just sat around so long, they're and then they basically started having anxiety attacks because their brain isn't working. Their brain's not active enough. And I don't know, I'm making that up. That might not be true. But what is true is the glass delusion and the connection to melancholy. There actually was a book called The Anatomy of Melancholy back in 1621. So these people were being diagnosed with this stuff. And psychologists, even back then, I don't think they were called psychologists. I think they were probably called witch doctors or something, alchemists. But they were trying to figure out why people had glass delusion and how to cure it. And what's weird is people have been cured of glass delusion, but we don't know how. When you look through the text back then, they're oh, this young woman, she thought her legs were made of glass, so she wouldn't go anywhere. And then a monk showed up and she was cured. And then you turn the page and you're wait, what? So we don't know how it's cured. But glass delusion wasn't the only delusion listed in the Anatomy of Melancholy. These are the other things that people thought they were. Some people thought they were completely made of cork. which I don't know when cork was invented again. I think there was probably like Genghis Khan had like cork stoppers in his wine and stuff like that. But it's funny because you would basically think you were like, how would you, at what point do you wake up and your brain goes, you're cork? And you're like, what? Your brain's like, you're cork. You're a big piece of cork, dude. And at first you'd be like, no, I'm not. Look at, and then your brain would convince you were a cork. But how would you test that? Just take a bath? Like, if you just got in a bathtub and you sat at the bottom, you'd be like, no, I'm not. And the brain's like, dagnabbit, foiled again. But, I mean, I guess maybe, like, they got in the bathtub and they were kind of floating and they thought they were a cork. People also thought, along the same lines as cork, they were light as feathers. So, again, these are easy things to test. I get if you thought your legs or your stomach or your butt or whatever was made of glass, that you wouldn't want to test that. You're like, no, I'm not. And then you jump down on your butt on the floor and just shatter. Like, I get not wanting to test that. But if I had the delusion that I was light as feathers, I would want to test that. I'd be all, wee! I'd just be like walking down the street and then a stiff wind comes and I fly away. I would want to test that. I wouldn't be scared if I was light as a feather. I probably wouldn't be scared if I was light as a cork, but I wouldn't test that because you would have to jump into a big thing of water. Now you're thinking, well, those are pretty good. Who doesn't want to be lighter? Who doesn't want to fly away or bob in the water? Well, some people thought they were heavy as lead, which, again, is something you could easily test simply by flexing your joints and doing that little thing called moving around. Like, you could I think that'd probably be the easiest one to fake, though, because little kids do it all the time when the mom's like, come on, you gotta go to bed, and they're like, I can't get up. So, I mean, they could fake that, but again, like, if someone tried to convince me that, dude, you're as heavy as a piece of lead, I'd be like, no, I'm not, and I would just stand up. And if my brain tried to convince me of that, I would still be like, oh, that's a good, easy one to test because you're not fragile. So if someone says, I have the reaction times of lead, I can't move, just throw a baseball at him. Throw an what's the old-timey equivalent of a baseball? A rock, I guess, would just be, you throw a rock at them, and when they grab it, because they don't want to get beamed in the face, you go, does lead move that fast? I would be the ultimate psychologist in the old times. Or witch doctors, as they're more commonly known as. Another thing noted in this amazing book called The Anatomy of Melancholy is, this story isn't short, I'm actually having a lot of fun with this, is frogs full of bellies. Wait, no, I wrote that backwards. It's bellies full of frogs, which makes much more sense. Frogs full of bellies would not be your problem. That would be the problem of the frog. You gotta take better notes. A belly full of frogs. So that would be something that would be hard to test, obviously, because you'd be like, look it, my stomach's full of frogs. And you're like, no, they're not. I mean, what are you going to do then? Cut them open? Because any sort of like rumbling in your stomach, they're just eating beans all the time. And they're like, I'm telling you, frogs are in my stomach. And you're like, dude, quit eating beans. And you won't. And he's like, they want to eat beans. Brr. That would be a hard one. And that would be really disconcerting to think you had a bunch of frogs in your stomach. Why frogs and not other amphibians or even mammals? I don't know. But I'm sure somebody thought there was like a mongoose in their stomach. And then this was an interesting one. There was one other listed here, and that was that your head would roll off. That if you didn't keep your head upright or you weren't holding onto your head in some fashion, your head would just roll off your body. That's, again, not something that somebody would want to test. You're like, no, your head is attached, just move your hands. And they're like, I believe you, and then their head rolls off. Like, you wouldn't want to do that. Now, I'm going to butcher this name, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Tchaikovsky? The composer? Tchaikovsky? Whatever, you know his name. He thought his head would fall off if he didn't hold it upright. And people thought it was a myth. Like, historians are like, maybe that's not true. Maybe that was just a myth that he had this delusion. But they've unearthed writings that are of that time period where he was like, no, I'd really to compose, but I gotta hold my head up all the time. People are like, what? He's like, yeah, if I move away from my piano and stand up and start composing, how do I know where to keep my head? And they're like, what are you talking about? He's like, my head's gonna fall off if I don't keep it perfectly upright. And again, he was treated for that. But nobody knows why. People know why, but nobody knows how he was treated for that, and eventually he realized his head wouldn't fall off. But again, these are interesting delusions because they tended to affect the wealthy, especially the glass one. I think probably the poor people back then didn't worry about having delusions because they were just dying of horrible diseases and preventable medical issues. They're like, oh, I think I'm made of glass, but also all of my teeth are infected and I'm slowly dying, so pick your poison. But for the rich people who had all the food and the medical care of the time that they needed, they would have time to sit around and think of these made-up diseases. And interestingly enough, Glass Delusion is still around. It's incredibly rare. But every so often someone pops up and they think they're made of glass. Recently, a woman thought she was made of a clay pot. And then again, they just kind of treat it, and then one day the person goes, oh yeah, I'm not that anymore. And they just get up and walk away. It's kind of a bizarre delusion. It affects them short term. It's super, super vivid. And then just with whatever treatment, they still don't know why. They just wake up one day and they go, what? I'm not made of glass. And they go out and they play rugby or something. Probably not rugby. That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.